Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the latest in our series of best practice webinars here for BMC's Digital Service Operations Group. As a reminder, we hold these meetings every other Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central. We cover a variety of topics. A calendar of past events and future topic events is available on BMC Communities. Just type in TrueSight webinar calendar, or you can follow the link in the email invite that I sent out. This session today is being recorded, and so the recording will be made available via that Communities invite shortly after. It usually takes me about a day or two to get the recording out and edit it and so forth and host it up. All right, my name is Seth Paskin. I'm the Director of Technical Marketing for our group, and today we're doing something a little different. We've invited folks from our server automation group as well as other parts of our businesses, as well as our in-house folks to talk about understanding cloud security. Now, what we want to do here, we will be showcasing later on in the demo portion a solution that we have called TrueSight Cloud Security, TrueSight Cloud Operations platform. But this isn't really about the product. What we want to do with this session is give you some best practices and some understanding of really the differences between understanding and managing security in the public cloud versus in the data center that you might be familiar with. So Rick Bosworth and Rick Lefort are going to cover that. Rick Bosworth is going to lead off and talk about the differences and give you some information about how you approach cloud security differently than data center security, and then Rick Lefort will take you through the demo. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hit mute and turn it over to Rick Bosworth. Rick?
Thank you, Seth. Can you hear me okay? Super. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Bosworth. I'm joined with Rick Lefort here this morning, and let's dig in and understand what's going on with cloud security. Okay, so first of all, we need to understand that the practices that we deployed for on-premises security just are not going to work in the cloud. The public cloud is a different animal altogether. You know, when we talk about on-prem, we think about the analogy of a fortified castle. We build these castle walls high, we build them thick, and we mortar any gaps. But that works for a relatively static on-premise data center environment, but it's just not going to work for the cloud because the cloud is constantly changing. We have similar but not identical services across multiple cloud service provider platforms that launch regularly as the CSPs compete and seek to differentiate from each other and stand out. And meanwhile, the developers, the devs, they're rushing over themselves to swipe a credit card to consume all the latest shiny new services, all in an effort so that they can quickly innovate. So you can imagine that this is a highly dynamic city where people are moving about, and so the whole idea of a fortified castle wall just completely falls to the ground. Also consider that your devs, they're pushing updates to production multiple times a day, and each update brings with it the risk of a single cloud resource misconfiguration. And that misconfiguration could expose critical IP or customer data. And one thing I want to point out here is there's a quote from Gartner. They've recently doubled down on their assessment. They say now that through 2023, 99% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. And what they're specifically talking about here is the misconfiguration of cloud services. Okay, so it's one thing to say, but if you spend 5 minutes in a Google browser, you'll see headline after headline which proves what I'm saying here, that the enterprise continues to struggle with securing their public cloud footprint. I mentioned that a single misconfiguration from a dev could expose critical data. Shown here is Rubrik. Just last week, Rubrik are a major cloud data management player. They make their living managing client data. They're an enterprise software company. But a single misconfiguration of an AWS Elasticsearch server in a dev account, in a dev environment, not even prod, exposed extensive customer data. So this is press that no one needs. These are the wrong kind of headlines, and it's full of names that we recognize, people who make their living in the cloud like GoDaddy and Tesla, but also people that you might not expect like the DoD, or maybe even enterprises that you never even heard of like Exactus, who are a US-based marketing firm that have extensive data for all US consumers, and they had a major exposure last summer, summer of 2018. So the enterprise continues to struggle. The cloud is constantly evolving, and we're playing catch up here. It's like we're bringing stones to a gunfight. All right, so that's the current state. So that brings us to TrueSight Cloud Security, and I'm about to turn this over to Rick for a demo, but TrueSight Cloud Security is a SaaS cloud security and compliance solution. It automates security checks and remediation so that we're managing those cloud resources consistently, securely, and with an audit trail. Shown here is the dashboard. Cloud resource configuration security is provided for the services across AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, you know, the big three. What we're doing is we're securing the configuration of those cloud-native PaaS services, as well as OS hardening for IaaS, such as an EC2 instance. We're also delivering automation so that you can take your cloud operations to scale. We're delivering automation not only for the security checks themselves, but also for the remediation. We're not just pointed at a problem and saying, go write a script to fix it. We've abstracted all that complexity and cost away from the customers, and it's available at multiple levels. You can remediate by pressing the easy button via our point, click, and fix user interface. Anything you do via the UI can be done programmed via our REST API, or perhaps even skip over that REST API step and go straight to self-driving remediation, where you pass control over to the machine, over to the solution. For certain policies, if you find a violation that's so egregious, say an OpenS3 bucket, in production, you'll automatically want to shut that down, and that's what self-driving remediation does. Again, no scripting whatsoever required. We're also delivering full-stack container security. We know that containers are growing like wildfire within the enterprise, and rightly so. The promise of build once, deploy anywhere is just too juicy an offer to ignore. It's attractive both to developers and to cloud operations personnel. And so what we've done is we've implemented the CIS framework for securely configuring Docker and Kubernetes. Next, we're delivering enterprise capabilities that enterprise customers would expect, things like intelligent prioritization, exception management and notification handling, as well as integration through your ITSM tools so that TrueSight Cloud Security can communicate with your ticketing for incident management and change management. And finally, our architecture is designed in the cloud, for the cloud, intended to be fully extensible. All of our policies are available, ready to use right out of the box. If you can copy, paste, and edit, you can also create your own custom policies and add that to the extensive library that comes ready to use. And with that, I will turn the ball over to Rick Lefort.
Hey, Rick, this is Seth. Do you mind if I jump in real quick here before you do the demo?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. let me go ahead and just share one slide. I want to make one thing clear for folks because I think this is really, really the big thing to get out of this presentation, or something else that you want to get out of this presentation is this. Let's see. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, can see it.
Okay. All right. So the difference between, one of the key differences about managing cloud security, customers are going to the cloud because it means that they don't have to manage infrastructure, or in some case manage the infrastructure and the OS and the runtime layer, or even manage the software at all. They just consume the software. So most of you are probably familiar with this graphic, which I think has been floating around the internet for quite some time. So when you're managing your responsibility for securing your resources in the data center, when you look at the far left, what's called on-premises in this slide, the infrastructure itself, you have to secure the infrastructure, which means server, storage, networking, both edge and core. You have to secure the OS and the runtime resources that are used, and then you also have responsibility for the applications. As you move to the right and you leverage either infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, what you see here is the box in green that you manage gets smaller, and the box in red that the public cloud providers manages gets bigger. But under a public cloud shared responsibility model, just because the AWS or Azure are giving you the server, storage, networking, and the virtualization layer, saying the infrastructure as a service, yes, you don't have to patch or manage the infrastructure, but the way that you configure those to run your OS and your applications, or in the case of platform as a service, the way that you configure and manage the virtualization infrastructure and OS and runtime layers underneath your applications still matters. You still have ownership of that. And so just because the public cloud provider is managing the way that those things run, you still are responsible for making sure that user accounts are set properly, that access policies are set properly, that IP restrictions and all kinds of other things, virtual private nets, and the configuration of those elements. If Azure offers you SQL as a service, you can still configure that SQL service to be open to the entire world. You can configure it with a root password of root, right? Those are the kinds of things that in cloud operations, cloud security operations are quite a bit different than on-premise, because you don't have direct visibility to those things through your typical standard security tools that you've been using for the data center. And for most enterprises where they have a mix of both their traditional data centers they're running, cloud-native applications that are leveraging platform as a service, lift and shift legacy apps that are running now in IaaS environments, you need a complex of tools. You need different tools to manage the different aspects of it. So apologies for jumping in there, but I wanted to get that out. So let me go ahead and turn this over to Rick, the other Rick. Let's see, participants. All right, Rick, you should be able to share your screen now for the demo. And Rick, I need to unmute you. What number are you called in on? Rick Lefort, I've got you on mute, so I need to unmute you. Okay. Sorry about this, folks. Let me see if I can figure out. Let's see. Rick, can you hear me? We cannot hear you. All right, hang on just 1 second. All right, Rick, I think I unmuted you. Are you there? Rick?
I still can't hear him.
There we go.
There he is.
Apologies.
Got me?
Yep, we got you.
All right, technology, isn't it wonderful? Yeah, I was talking to myself. Thanks for that transition, Seth. That was really good and very helpful, I think. So with that, it's just like we planned it. Hopefully you can see my screen here with AWS Services teed up. Can you see that?
Sure can.
Okay, good. So this is not an AWS demo, but I wanted to drive Seth and Rick's point home about the breadth of services that are available on AWS, first of all, to give everybody a sense of it in case they haven't seen it. So what you're looking at here is I'm logged into my AWS account, and AWS has roughly 150 PaaS services available for your use. They're broken into something like 20 different categories. There's some here that folks are probably familiar with to some degree. There's EC2 services, EC2 that represents VMs virtually. S3 storage, you might have heard of S3 buckets. There's VPCs for virtual private networks, things like that. There's services like Elasticsearch. And the thing about this is that there's new services coming all of the time. So that's what AWS is in the business of, is selling their services and getting people to consume more, and so that's what they crank out. But as Seth said, the interesting thing about this with the shared responsibility model is that even though AWS is securing this platform itself, and same with Azure or Google Cloud, the customer is responsible for making sure that the services that they use and consume are properly configured. And that may sound easy, but it's really not when you get into it, because if you consider the fact that this is one AWS account, there's 150 services. Within each of these services, there could be multiple, say, Elasticsearch services configured. The problem just grows exponentially, and it's very, very difficult to maintain these configurations. So let me drill in a little bit deeper here before we get into the product, and let's just take a look at Elasticsearch, for example. So in this Elasticsearch service, this is Elasticsearch is a search and analytics engine that's available on AWS, and in fact, 99% of the ES services that run in the world today are hosted on AWS. The way it works is it ingests data and makes it searchable. So for demo purposes, I've already created my Elasticsearch. I've got a couple here. But if I'm, say, a developer, and I don't want to pick on developers necessarily, but I'm a developer, I come in here in my Elasticsearch, I'm in a hurry, I've got to crank something out really quick. You can see there's tons of configuration settings here in this Elasticsearch. And I just need to get it up quickly. So typically what happens is, just because of that, I'll leave it wide open just to get it up and running. So in this case, here's the access policies for this Elasticsearch. It's as simple as saying, hey, allow open access to the domain, hit OK, or accept the risk, hit OK, I don't care because I just need it up. And you'll see here in this particular configuration, this asterisk means this domain is wide open. And ultimately, if this domain hosts customer data, it could get hacked, just like Rick Bosworth showed in the second slide with all of those stories that were in the news. So with that, let me switch over to TrueSight Cloud Security, the thing I really want to show you, and show you how we can continuously monitor CSPs like AWS and consistently check these configurations. And you need a tool like this to be able to do that because, as was said, I think a couple times today, this is really just beyond human scale. So here's the dashboard of TrueSight Cloud Security. And what this view is, it provides an overall view of your compliance status across all of your environments. So what does that mean? That means across all of my AWS accounts, across all of my Azure accounts, across all of my GCP accounts, and so on. So I get this comprehensive view of what's going on in my environment. It's basically a real-time look at where I'm at. Now, let's say I want to find something like that Elasticsearch domain that the developer accidentally made wide open to the public. So I can narrow this down to a particular account. In this case, I'm going to pick mine for demo purposes. Now I've filtered this data down to just that particular account. I've got some 2,300 resources in that account. Again, resources in this case are things like Elasticsearch, S3 buckets, EC2 instances, and so on. I've got a number of them that are non-compliant, a number that are compliant, and so I want to act on this. So what I can do is I can filter the data a little bit more. And there's various ways to do that. I can do that through a further break it down into accounts or tagging if the resources are tagged. Get resource types. And the resource type we're concerned about in this case is Elasticsearch. You can see all the other types here that we could also check for. So I'm pulling up my Elasticsearch services. In fact, in this account, I've got 18 that are non-compliant. And you'll notice here on the left, I've got 18 that are critical. So that tells me something's bad. So I want to act on these right now. So I can filter this data down very quickly. And if I look in the list here of these resources that are non-compliant, I should be able to find my customer data resource. And sure enough, it's right here. And this is the policy that it's violating. And I'll get into this in a bit more detail, but here's my resource. And if I want to fix it, and in this case, I'm talking about fixing it manually, I can drill in, I can see how long the resource has been compliant or non-compliant with this bar across the top, and then see the rules that it's violating, check the box here, and hit remediate. Now, what's happening here is that TrueSight Cloud Security is reaching out into this account through our API, through the AWS API in this case, and closing down the open access to that Elasticsearch domain. And you'll also notice here that we have a ticket ID here. So we have the capability for tracking purposes of creating an incident in your ITSM environment or a change ticket if necessary, so that you've got a record of these things as they happen. Now, in this case, I remediated this manually, but as Rick said, this is happening so fast and the environment's so dynamic, we can also do this in an automated fashion as well. So as soon as these resources become non-compliant, we can remediate them very quickly automatically, rather without human intervention if necessary. So that's how we would find a configuration issue and get visibility into it and fix it, in this case, manually. So now that I've said that, let me show you a little bit about how this works in the last few minutes, and then I think we'll switch it to Q&A. So the way we communicate with these accounts is through the notion of connectors. Connectors are the mechanism that we use to pull back the configuration data for all of the cloud resources. So effectively, we're scanning that account like a security scanner might do. And in this case, I've got a number of connectors in my environment. This is the connector that I just used for my account, and it's pulling back that configuration data. So what do we do with that data when it comes back? Well, we analyze it against policies. And like Rick said, these policies that we have are based on CIS standards. So you'll see a number of policies that we have here. So as the data comes back from AWS through the connector, we take the policies based on CIS standards, or we also have our own BMC policies to supplement some of these as well. And customers have the ability to create their own. They can start with an existing policy and create their own if they like. But we take these policies and analyze it against the data, and that's what determines if the resources are compliant or non-compliant. Just a couple other things real quick in the last minute that I'd like to point out.
Rick?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've got a question. You guys keep mentioning CIS. Can you tell us what that is? Yeah,
so CIS is Center for Internet Security. These are They determine, they've got standards to determine when resources like these PaaS services, how they should be configured to be secure. So we've adopted those as our standard of choice, which is really what the industry wants to see, our customers want to see. And so we've codified these standards basically into these policies, and they're available out of the box. So the customer, when they configure an environment, they get these policies automatically for free, essentially. And because it's a SaaS solution, as we update the policies and new versions become available, the policies are pushed out to the customer to accept as they're ready. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So can customers modify those or write their own policies?
Yes, absolutely. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen here, you'll see the authoring sandbox. So built right into the solution is the ability to create their own policies. And again, it would make sense to start with an existing policy and then build from there to create their own. So take, for example, like a password policy. If they want to create a custom password policy, they might change the password length from 8 to, say, 12 or something like that and create their own. And for that matter, they could create different policies for different environments. So if, for example, there a lot of times, and this is based on AWS best practice recommendations, they recommend different accounts for production, development, and QA. So you might have different policies that behave differently for those types of environments that they're scanning against. Okay. I know we're running out of time here. Just a couple more things. Built right into the product is we can generate reports such as new violation reports. So every day, if you come into the office, you want to see if any new violations occurred overnight, we could generate reports and send those to the appropriate people. So think about certain people own certain cloud provider accounts, so you could send these reports based on the account they're running against to the right person so that they can act on their own compliance issues, that sort of thing. So new violation report, there's various reports available out of the box. And then lastly, something our customers have asked for, and this is important for, especially for like enterprise type shops, the ability to set exceptions. So sometimes it's the case when you've got a resource, maybe an S3 bucket, where you know it's open to the public, but it's okay, and you're okay with that for a certain period of time. You can set an exception for those resources for a period of time that allows the cloud security to basically ignore the violation so that alerts and alarms aren't going off for it to be fixed. So I think that about does it for me and the demo. Did I leave anything out, or are there any current questions?
Yes, so one question we've got here, Rick, is, you showed in the demo, you talked about the connector, like to the account and the different resources. So one question is, can you look at one type of resource across all connectors, or do you have to go into a specific connector? Like if I wanted to look at all my Elasticsearch or things across all of my AWS accounts, could I do that?
Well, so the connector could be configured for all the AWS accounts, and when you configure a connector, you determine which policies you want to analyze against the data that comes back from that connector. So you could conceivably configure just the Elasticsearch policy if that's what you want, if that's all you care about.
Okay. And it looked like, so we've got a question from Ian Taylor here. If non-compliance is found across multiple policies, will it clear all by clearing just the one? I think he's saying if you find an asset that is non-compliant against multiple policies and you clear one of them, will the other?
Yes, if the configuration that's remediated for one policy satisfies the another policy, yes, it will be cleared.
Okay, so it depends on the it depends on if it's like a cascading policy or something.
Right. It depends because the policies are made up of rules. So for the policy to be completely compliant, all of the rules within that policy would need to pass the checks. So assuming they all pass, then both policies would be compliant.
Got it. Okay, so another question. If you go back to your dashboard for a second, it looks like you support tagging. Can you talk a little bit about, one of the key things that happens with on-premises and data center security vulnerability management is the need, like there's blind spots, right? So you need a robust discovery solution to help you to work in tandem with your vulnerability management solution on-premise. How does discovery work in the cloud, and how can you be sure you're seeing everything you need to see? And then how does this tool consume the configuration and tags from the environments that you're connecting to?
Well, I can take the second part of that first. So these tags are tags that are on the resources within the cloud provider. So in this case, these are tags that we would find on resources in our AWS accounts. So these are tags we're reading that are basically coming back with the connector data. Now, what we found is that we can actually, and a couple of our customers have asked for this, we can actually set a policy that says if the resources themselves are not tagged or tagged appropriately, that itself can be a compliance violation because they want to make sure that all of the resources they're using are tagged and identified based on what, say, business application they're associated with. So that's one part of it. And then, so the way we use that data is, as shown here, we can filter, let's say we have a certain business application that we want to make sure that that application as a whole is compliant. We could filter all the tags associated with that application, let's say GitLab here, for example, and then act from there once we filter down to those resources that are tagged that way.
Okay.
So could I jump in?
Please.
Part of the question was how does this work with discovery? How does discovery find your resources in the cloud? So what discovery will do is go identify the resources, map the dependencies, as well as generate and map your applications. So with that information, customers can then inform a comprehensive asset tagging strategy in the cloud, and that ties back to what Rick Lefort was talking about now I can go tag my resources associated with my GitLab or retail banking or payroll service, whatever application or digital service you have up in the cloud. You can then tag those resources, come back into TrueSight Cloud Security and filter by those tags. In so doing, you'll have a digital service aware security posture. You'll have a security posture that's only looking at the specific service that you're interested in or whatever tag you're interested in, cost center, developer, what have you.
Great. So it's really adding the power of being able to put context and relationships as well as tags to create complex models around the applications and services you're interested in, or even the business organization.
Yes, you stated it far more succinctly and eloquently than I did. Thank you.
Okay. We're running a little bit long. Is there anything else you wanted to show, Rick, or anything else you wanted to say, Rick Bosworth, before I close it up?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say the key points here are the ability to find these type of resources, act on them, using standards, and then all things like being able to set exceptions and send reports about this is what makes this a really powerful solution.
And hey, Seth, if I could jump in, I actually do have two things I wanted to say in closing. One, I'd like to invite every customer and prospective customer on the call to take the free trial. Don't just take our word for it. You know, hook up this solution to your cloud environments. You have a free, no obligation, 14-day entitlement to the solution. Just go to www.bmc.com/cloud-security. The big call to action is the big green button, take the free trial. The other thing is I'd like to announce that today on BMC Communities, we are going live with a TrueSight Cloud Operations community. So you can get in there, connect with like-minded professionals and share best practices, talk about challenges you're facing, or even ask questions on BMC solutions. So that's it. Thank you, Seth, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rick. So for everybody on the call, this session is being recorded. I will post the recording on the community's event, a link to the recording on the community's event after I get it processed, which takes me a day or two. I will also put Rick's slides up for you if you would like, and I will also provide a link to the free trial. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns either about the solution and cloud operations, cloud security, this solution, our webinar series, please direct them at me. You can reach me directly at Seth_Paskin@bmc.com, which is also, or through communities. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you very much for everybody for your attendance, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.